Okay, hello everybody and welcome to this webinar and this book launch. I would first and foremost give the floor to Alison Foyle from Routledge Education, who will welcome us and say a few words about the series in which this book has a place.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you for that. Welcome everybody. I'm Alison Foyle. I'm the Senior Publisher with Routledge Education, and I have been looking after the Contesting Early Childhood series since its inception. So when Peter Moss and Gunilla Dahlberg approached me back in the early 2000s, they had a fantastic idea for a new book series, and were actually quite modest about its appeal. They planned to invite some leading early years scholars to contribute to a series which the scholars who are known for their unique questioning of dominant discourses surrounding early childhood. And I think to their absolute delight, they were overwhelmed with enthusiasm for the concept, and authors from all over the world were very eager to contribute. So the Contesting Early Childhood series was launched to much acclaim. So we had authors like Helen Penn and Carlina Rinaldi, Glenda McNaughton offered much needed alternative narratives to mainstream debates and presented their arguments really, I think, really accessibly and meaningfully to early years students, researchers and scholars around the world. So the first book in the series was published, and it was authored actually by Gunilla and Peter themselves, Ethics and Politics in Early Childhood, and unbelievably 15 years ago today. It was just an immediate bestseller and really the perfect launch for what turned out to be a real field-defining collection of books. So in 2014, Peter and Gunilla stepped down as series editors, passing the reins to Michelle here and Lisa Lott. And Michelle and Lisa Lott have nurtured and recruited new authors from all over the globe, and the series now stands at 20 titles and has been translated into 15 languages, including Japanese, Norwegian, Spanish, Swedish, and it really is a jewel in the crown for Routledge's early childhood list. So I just want to say we're enormously proud and honoured to be publishing this long-awaited book from Michelle this month. Peter Moss himself has said about the book that the themes are needed more than ever in an age when education, like so much else, is so enmeshed in neoliberalism, and it features a challenging alternative narrative from a pedagogical thinker of world renown. I'd just like to thank Michelle and to Lisa Lott for their continuing support and their dedication in bringing to life ideas and perspectives of some really great writers and amazing thought leaders from around the world. And very much look forward to immersing myself in an evening of Freire tonight. So congratulations to Michelle, and thank you for this incredible achievement.
Thank you very much, Alison. And I think you also have something to offer to the participants here.
Yes, we have a special discount on the book. I'll put this in the chat so that you don't forget, but I have a discount code which will give you 25% discount on the retail price of the book. So I think if you just click through to the link on the invite, and then you just put in the discount code, I'll put it in the chat, and that will give you the money off at the checkout. So it's just a little perk for attending tonight. So
thank you so much. And I'm very happy to say that Lisa Lott Olsen, who is co-coordinating editor of the series with me, we took over from Peter Moss and Gunilla Dahlberg, as you explained, that Lisa Lott is also among us this evening or this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are around the globe. So this is also a book launch, but it's also a celebration. We have here a glass of wine to celebrate because we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of the publication of the English language version of this iconic book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. An iconic book that has been sold and translated all over the world, but that maybe is less well known in the early childhood community. Although it has been a source of inspiration for 50 years, it has been a source of inspiration for educationalists in many fields of educational science and for practitioners all over the world. It has been a source of inspiration for me personally and also for the other co-authors of this book. Now, one of the quotes that I really cherish and that is also illustrated in the book is that Paulo Freire is not the kind of author that wants to be just followed. He said the best way for you to understand me is to reinvent me. And it's one of the quotes that is also illustrated in the book, and it has been one of the guidelines for us as authors when we worked with his legacy. I will say a few words about how we constructed the book, and then I will give some highlights. So the first chapter of the book is a short introduction on the life and work of Paulo Freire, so that we can situate him historically and geographically. But because we think that maybe he's not the context of Paulo Freire is not always very well known in the early childhood community. And then I have written a first chapter where I took some of the ideas of Paulo Freire that I think are very relevant today, and I will speak about it in a minute. And that chapter was sent to experts in early childhood education from very different countries and from very different continents, indeed. And they all contributed to replying to that introductory chapter from their perspective, from their context, from their historical, local, geographical, political context. And so we have 8 chapters that form the center of the book, from Brazil, Portugal, South Africa, Canada, USA, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. And many of these authors are also among us tonight and will also present some of their ideas later on. And then I concluded the book with a concluding discussion chapter, and that was very much inspired also by another book of Paulo Freire. That's one of the last books that he contributed to. That was called Pedagogy of Hope, because for Paulo Freire, pedagogy was a science of hope, and I will come back to that. Another aspect of the book is that every author of a chapter chose one special quote from Paulo Freire, and that was sent to a calligrapher in that country, an artist who made the calligraphy of that specific quote. So I would like really to thank Brody Neuenschwander and John William de Koene, who made that possible and who contacted colleague calligraphers from all around the world, and that they have illustrated the book. Yeah, can the slide reading. So one of these quotes, my favorite one, that is now hanging in my office, it's this one. It's saying the best way for you to understand me is to reinvent me, and that's what we did, because in those 50 years since Pedagogy of the Oppressed, of course, much has changed. We have seen a very strong growth of what I would call a modernist take at early childhood education, very much dominated by developmental psychology, for instance, with a very strong focus on children's outcome, on milestones in development. We have also had a strong critique of that in that iconic beginning of the series by Peter Moss and Gunilla Dahlberg. They would have labeled as a postmodern take. And we live today in a period that many call a post-truth period, a period of fake news, and of course we see it every day on our news when the presidential debates in the US take place, that there is a very particular way to deal with facts. And I think in this historical hinge period, it is very interesting to go back to Paulo Freire and to also look at the epistemological stance, at the epistemological questions that Paulo Freire raised. And Pedagogy of the Oppressed is also an inspiring book on the relations between facts and on one side, facts and objectivity, and on the other side, subjectivity and ideology. And I think indeed that we are today surrounded by measurements. I refer to PISA, I refer to the EELS, the new, what is called the baby PISA, to the league tables, and we are we are submerged with league tables and data about children and measurements, and these are presented to us as something neutral, as neutral facts. But of course, we all know that data do not speak for themselves. Data have to be spoken for, and they are anything but neutral. And in that sense, I believe that what we have done, what we have made together here, is a radical book questioning the objectivity of the data that are presented to us. A radical book in the Freirean sense. And I once again quote Paulo Freire, where he says that, and I quote, "We need radicalism if we are to go beyond, on the one hand, sectarianisms founding themselves on universal exclusive truth, and on the other hand, pragmatic accommodations to the facts as if the facts had turned immutable." Of course, that is not to say that facts do not matter. That would be stupid. Of course, facts matter. But what I want to stress, especially in the first chapter, that is to say that the choice of what facts to highlight, that is an ideological choice. And therefore, the book points at the responsibility of the early childhood community, I mean practitioners as well as researchers, the responsibility to reflect on the choices that we make, to reflect on the choices about which facts to present. And in that sense, I believe, or at least that is the aim, that this book can function as what Freire would have called a cultural circle for, and I'm sorry for my Portuguese, Annette, for conscientização, making ourselves conscious of what is presented to us, and realizing that the way that early childhood education is presented to us is made by men and therefore can be unmade by men. So I think that the chapters in these books, the different chapters from different countries, are as much examples of such a reflection, examples of how practitioners as well as researchers resist the dominant views on what matters, on what facts matters. And in so doing, they show us that yes, there are alternatives and there are many, and therefore choices are inevitable. So I would now like to give the floor to some of the co-authors so that they can present their views, their ways of resistance, the choices they have made, their paradigmatic choices also. And of course, it is only natural that we start with our Brazilian colleagues, the home country from Paulo Freire. So I will now give the floor to Annette Abramovich and Ligia Leao from Brazil. Annette, you have the floor, so if you can unmute your mic. Oh, maybe I have to add something important. If you have questions, please write your questions in the chat. We will compile the questions, and afterwards, after all the intervention, we will see what are the main questions, and we can have a discussion about it. So it is, I think we are too many to interrupt each time, so we will compile all the questions at the end. But please go ahead and use the chat. That's where it's for. Annette, you have the floor.
Thanks, Michel. Ladies and gentlemen, depend when you are. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Annette Abramovich, and I am professor at the University of São Paulo, in São Paulo, and wrote this paper with Professora Ligia Aquino, da Universidade Estadual do Rio de Janeiro. We were very honored to be invited by Professor Michael van der Broek to write an article about our relation with Paulo Freire and childhood education. When we received this invitation, we were going through the worst Brazilian political and social nightmare. An extreme right-wing party won federal election whose candidate had been congressman for 27 years, during which time he never called any bill in favor of the city population. Moreover, he declared that one of the worst torturers during Brazilian military dictatorship was a hero for him. He also makes it very clear that he is in favor of killing and occupying indigenous lands. He supports arming the population and by doing so encourage violence against human and LGBTI plus population. He encourages and neglects the fires in Amazon rainforest, including in indigenous reserves such as Xingu Indigenous Park in Pantanal, wetlands in Mato Grosso, and in Cerrado, the Brazilian savanna, just to favor logging companies, mining companies, and the Brazilian agricultural elite who are extremely racist. During his government, he has destroyed almost all protection policies about environment, children, and other affirmative policies. When COVID-19 pandemic made clear the huge Brazilian inequality, the president adopted the herd immunity, saying, so what? If people have died, and will die, and people are still dying. You are near the 200,000 deaths. COVID-19 has killed, for the most part, poor and black people, those in the most precarious situation. To be part of this meeting is a way to report what is happening in Brazil and resist. In this government, Paulo Freire has been constantly attacked by the president, his ministers, and his followers. As soon as he assumed the presidency, he nominated the worst minister of education in the Brazilian history, who declared that his objective was to burn Paulo Freire's work and what he meant. Freire has been the Brazilian education patriot since 2012. You are right from the beginning. When we fought for the diversity agenda, that's what this genocider fights again. The different way of life whose basis is joy. Why is Paulo Freire so criticized by the extreme right? The fact that he is criticized by the fascists showed how important this project led by Michel Vanderbroek is to propose a book about Paulo Freire and his work written by research from different places in the world. I'd like to congratulate you once again for the initiative. It is necessary to have political sensitivity to understand that nowadays in the contemporary world there is a return of fascism, and Paulo Freire was a fierce fighter against intolerance. This meeting we are having now helps Brazil in our fight against the totalitarianism that several democracies are developing. I mean, a fascism that is being born inside democracies. Our paper aims to show that a new and alternative political imagination is unlocked when we start reading and thinking about Freire's education proposals. In our paper entitled Paulo Freire, His Actuality and New Ways to Think About Early Childhood Education, we discuss the possibility and the need to repoliticize childhood education based on the excerpt about child and childhood from almost 40 of his works, where we searched for evidence of pedagogical renewal in childhood education. We intend to ensure Freire's utmost contemporaneity by connecting it to the contemporaneous epistemological perspectives, especially post-colonial, when we show that the oppressed, who Paulo Freire points out in Pedagogy of the oppressed can be found in the framework proposed by Franz Fanon in his book, The Wretched of the Earth. It is needless to say how much that means, the global importance of fight against racism. You'd like to end reading the quotation that opens our chapter, said by Freire in his last interview. I am absolutely happy to be still alive and to have followed this march that, like other historical marches, reveals the impetus of the loving will to change the world. This march of the so-called landless works, I repeat, I would die. No, I am this march of the so-called landless workers. I would die happy if I saw Brazil full in its historical time of March. March of those who have no school. March of the disapproved. March of those who want love and cannot. March of those who refuse a servile obedience. March of those who rebel. March of those who want to be and are forbidden to be. I think, after all, that the marches are the wanderings around the world. The marches by Paulo Freire, except from his last interview, April 1997. I will read the quotation in Portuguese, the language of Paulo Freire. Eu estou absolutamente feliz por estar vivo ainda e ter acompanhado essa marcha, que, como outras marchas históricas, revela um ímpeto da vontade amorosa de mudar o mundo. Essa marcha dos chamados sem terra. Eu morreria feliz se visse o Brasil cheio em seu tempo histórico de marcha. Marcha dos que não têm escola, marcha dos reprovados, marchas dos que querem amar e não pode, marcha dos que se recusam a uma obediência servil, marcha dos que se rebelam, marcha dos que querem ser e estão proibidos de ser. Eu acho, afinal, que as marchas são as andarilhagens pelo mundo. Let's march together. And we end the paper with a quote by Paulo Virno. He says, it is not possible to conceive a form of critical thought that is not also in its every thought a meditation on childhood. Virno 25. We invited all to read our book organized by Michael Vanderbroek. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Annette. Thank you so much. And also thank you so much for your contribution in the book. I think it was also fascinating to read how you relate the work of Paulo Freire to the work of Fanon, and especially to this iconic book of The Wretched of the Earth, as you explained also now, and that has regained new attention with the Black Lives Matter movement. So thank you so much for that. I will now pass the floor to Bekisizwe Nimbande, who has written in the book how Freire can be used as a tool to reflect on post-apartheid South Africa. So the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. But I also want to just say thanks to Annette for just laying out that introduction of all the contributors, pretty strong, and you coming from a strong background of Paulo Freire's work, and also have lived what Paulo Freire has been teaching us all the years. So I am here at this revisiting Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and very excited that I was invited here. And I'm just going to start by saying that my name is pronounced Bekisizwe Ndimande. I'm an associate professor at the University of Texas at San Antonio. I am accompanied by Professor Beth Blue Sweetner, who is also my mentor since my graduate school days in Wisconsin. And she's a professor at Arizona State University. So we really work together in this book chapter in the contribution of this fine volume. I am very humbled too and honored to be part of this stunning volume. And it is, Michelle, this is a stunning volume that you put together. Thank you so much. And just to be collaborating and working with fine contributors of this volume. I'm just going to say a little bit. I know that we have 5 minutes and I'm just putting my eye on the clock. I'm just going to say a little bit about my background because Paulo Freire taught us that our experiences is what influence us to be engaged in the kind of research that we engage in. So it is our lived experiences that does that. So you may tell by my accent, I was born and raised under apartheid in South Africa many years ago. And those, I'm sure nobody in this forum would not be familiar with the system of apartheid. And just as Annette was describing what Bolsonaro is doing right now in Brazil, embracing the dictatorship of Brazil. So apartheid was a similar system in South Africa. So I was born and raised under that. I endured the now defunct apartheid education system that was offered only to Black children, and the system that did not allow the ideas of Paulo Freire to permeate in the curriculum. So in fact, the pedagogy of the oppressed was banned in South Africa when it first came out in 1970s. I mean, as I read further now to hear that it was also banned in Brazil, and even that one of the things that also forced Paulo Freire to go into exile in Chile and later on in other parts of the world. But what is interesting about banning the ideas of the book, you could ban the book, you could try to ban the ideas, but the ideas will not die, really. So in South Africa, the critical ideas of education and liberation somehow appeared, and they were so overarching, even in the midst of human suffering, in the midst of police brutalities, in what Paulo Freire himself would call the oppressed group. And in fact, I am part of the oppressed groups in South Africa. And in the 1980s, a movement was born in South Africa, led mostly by students. Most of them were much more older than I am. And this movement, as I learn now, the name of the movement was called the People's Education for People's Rights. So this movement, as I learn now growing up, because I was a child at that time, it turned out that it gathered all the ideas of Paulo Freire. And as I now begin to write about this movement and the work of Paulo Freire, and then having to be invited to this book, I really feel so excited that now I come in to say, how do we push these ideas even further in the post-apartheid system? So at that time, the movement was the mission, so to speak, and the broad goals which were drawn on Paulo Freire's work was looking at how could all the children of South Africa, this book talks about children, how could all the children of South Africa have access to liberatory education? Because as soon as you don't have a liberatory education, you're beginning to polarize, where some have privilege and others are oppressed. So I wanted to say that in, in in this chapter, and I want to quote a little bit from what Pesueda and I write about, start this chapter that you will all read. And I quote, although Paulo Freire was not writing directly about the education of children and youth in South Africa, his initial scholarship on adults' education and literacy in Brazil directly implicates issues of education and inequities produced by oppression, poverty, quote unquote, illiteracy, and discrimination in South Africa, unquote. So this is a context that Pesueda and I started writing this chapter as we got invited by Michelle to this book. In our contribution, in fact, Beth and I tried our best to connect the legacy of colonialism. I mean, there is no way you could write about South Africa, write about any other countries that suffered and endured colonialism without having to bring about issues of criticality, which Paulo Freire brings. I mean, the whole concept of oppression, it's a concept for me that unpacks colonialism, that unpacks apartheid. And I'd like to share a little bit of a story here, and maybe Annette and others might know the name of the university. I was once a visiting professor at the Universidade Federal Fluminense. I think that is in Rio, Brazil. And I had a brilliant student who asked me a question and said to me, Professor, how is Paulo Freire's work relevant to you as a Black man and coming from South Africa? And we really had a good conversation. And part of what we write about in here with Pesueda is related to that you cannot write about those struggles in Paulo Freire and not thinking about colonialism. So I think that was in the core of Paulo Freire, because colonialism, in our opinion, in this chapter, it is oppression. So that is in the core of the Paulo Freire scholarship. And I'll try to move a little bit faster. We also show some possibilities, though, as towards in the middle, as we make a transition, to show some possibility that happen under what's going on right now in post-apartheid South Africa that came in. And most times people think about changes come, changes they happen by themselves, just as it's going on right now. The Black Lives Matter movement is, and other organizations that are concerned about humanity, those are the people that are actually bringing the change. And I'm so sorry to get so personal. This morning, that's why I'm late a little bit. This morning I went in to do the early voting, and I was actually crying a little bit in that long line when I thought about, the right to vote, how we stand on the shoulders of those who died for us in order to be able to vote. And Paulo Freire will be one of those people to say that allow freedom so that all people, men and women, Black and white, those who are Asian American, those who are Native American, those who are Latina, those who have European descent, African descent, to all have that stake. And I'm so sorry that I digressed a little bit. So one of the frameworks that we point out in the chapter with Beth Pesueda is the South African National Framework for Children's Birth to 4. This is the one that we wrote about it, unpack it to see how it provides the glimmer of hope, as well as the National Development Plan, the Vision 2030. Those are the frameworks for children from birth to 4, and the other one from birth to 6, also showing that even if you were born as a Black child, you ought to be taken care of. You ought to have the child care that is necessary. But what is also important, but most people may not know, that came out in 2008, is the Children's Rights Act. And most people thought that the Children's Rights Act started in 2008, but it didn't start there. It started way before. The only difference is that in 2008, it began to look at, to provide even for the children of the oppressed, following again on Paulo Freire. And again, you may or may not know, but I've spent many years in the Friday group with Michael Apple in Madison, and I've observed him, inviting scholars to come in to talk about Paulo. I've, as my mentor and working with Sonia Nieto, who's also introduced me to Paulo Freire, Persuader as well. But I'm actually wanting to paraphrase Michael, because what he would say resonated with me today as I begin my work as scholar on my own, that if you were to come to the Friday seminar and talk about a paper that critically engages human oppression, as Michelle just mentioned earlier on, that those data that we talk about are not neutral data, but they are spoken on by us, by people who want to make sure what the data want to say. But if you engage with them, with that criticality of the Paulo Freire's vision of what a liberatory education means, interestingly, my computer will not want to know what liberatory is. I had to force it to say, you've got to know the name liberatory. Liberatory education it is. Then I don't think that we will be, we will realize the dream that Paulo Freire wanted. Again, Beth and I are so honored to be part of this outstanding volume, revisiting Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Press after 50 years. We think that it couldn't have come at a better time, especially in these times of polarized communities. In the United States, it's all over the press. We've seen what has been going on. Just communities are so polarized. Paulo Freire, when I started teaching, not reading, but teaching, using Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Text as a text in Arizona, at Arizona University, I was scared. I thought it was coming to Illinois. In Arizona University, that the text was banned. And now we are hearing the same language directed to professors in the United States, that they are activist professors. Aren't professors supposed to be activists, to be really advocating for all children to succeed and be able to humanize them? So I just want to end and say, on behalf of Persuader and I, we want to thank you and look forward to meeting all the contributors, including you, Michelle. And we are so honored to be part of this outstanding volume. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your contribution and for your testimony today. I will immediately pass on the word to Mark Nagasawa from the US, who is now a compatriot of you and who has made an interesting contribution, also together with Beth Swadner, on that values very much also the practitioner's point of view. So, Mark,
yes. Greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'll echo others' gratitude in being included in this collection. Our chapter, I'll give you a quick overview. Our chapter takes the title of an initiative in the United States to professionalize early care and education teachers called Power to the Profession, and it's led by the National Association for the Education of Young Children. And it's in brief, it's really based upon credentialing teachers nationally, which does not exist in the United States for early childhood, for the early years teachers. based upon a hierarchy of formal education. And so what we did was we did a close reading of the texts, the documents for the initiative, but really our analysis was centered on a conversation that Beth had with colleagues in a non-governmental organization about the effects of this initiative on the field. And in lots of ways, we lent our privilege to amplify their analysis and their critiques of some of the policies that are being advocated for through this initiative. And in the end, a lot of it is anchored to comparing early care and education to professions like nursing, and using that as an exemplar for a professional pathway for early years educators in the United States, which we read against a little bit and used some data to show that the ways that race, class, and gender have not been, and liberatory perspectives have not been a part of the professionalization in nursing. And so raising questions about whether or not that is the kind of exemplar that professionalization efforts in the United States should follow. And then we close the chapter reminding folks that there is a radical early childhood tradition in the United States, and use an example from Project Head Start, which was deeply rooted in the civil rights movement. People forget in the US now that there were Head Start centers with children and community members teaching that were firebombed, and that these were community generated with federal funding, but they were community generated, community directed initiatives to define what quality is, what local empowerment would be, what the curriculum would be, what teaching practices would be. And that was with outside help, but that's very far afield from where we are in the US in so many ways now. But in particular with the Power to the Profession initiative, which is very top down. It's a coalition of national organizations speaking for teachers, speaking for children, for parents and communities. And our reading was really an attempt to stimulate some critical dialogue and co-interpretive dialogue with the field, with others who are proponents of the Power to the Profession initiative. I mean, they call it, the NAEYC calls it a movement, but it's anything but. I think it has movement potential, but given who is leading it, how it's being led, a lot of it is social movement language being co-opted for political expediency. And so I'll leave it with that in terms of one other thing that I will add is, as a student, I read Freire and I was very puzzled sometimes with how to translate some of his very stimulating ideas into my scholarship. And so in some ways, what we tried to do with this chapter is do a hybrid of close reading methodology with a little bit of social science methods to try to make it clear as a reinterpretation of an acknowledgement of the need to stay, to be critical of methodological rigidity and narrowness, but as a nod to sort of my earlier self and some questions I had about how do you mobilize some of these ideas to stimulate the kind of critical dialogue that needs to happen for there to be true uprisings and movements, particularly by a predominant, a racially and ethnically diverse and gendered workforce. So I'll end with that.
Thank you so much, Mark. I will pass now to a very other part of the world. I will pass the floor to Sachiko Kitano from Japan. And if I'm correct, Sachiko, it is now rather late at night for you where you are.
I'm Sachiko Kitano from Kobe University, Japan. It's 5 a.m., very early morning in Japan. I'm so glad that I could have such a nice opportunity to cooperate with Michelle, and other very nice colleagues in the field of early childhood education. As my university, Kobe University, is one of the oldest university which have the preparation course for kindergarten teachers. We have 116 years history. So, this is one of the national university which prepare the early childhood kindergarten practitioners in Japan. However, I am facing very hard situation because we have, culture of age-dominated and also male-dominated culture. So in my university, I have been fighting so hard to survive from decreasing our field. So this is also very good opportunity for me to consider about humans' right and concept of bottom up and how we can, change from the grassroots. In my chapter, I first introduced about the very hard situation of early childhood education in Japan. As you know from the report of the OECD reports, and Japanese expenditure for early childhood education is one of the worst. And early childhood teachers are thinking that they are really isolated and not valued. And the average of the other countries' teachers, acceptance about the value and how they evaluated from the public is almost 90%, but in Japan it's like 60%. So the situation is very hard. Economically, it's also hard, and also the official constructors are also very hard situation. So, in my chapter, I first introduced about how the hard situation we are facing in the field of early childhood education. But in my chapter, I also introduced about the situation of very unique culture of early childhood care and education in Japan. As we are isolated from compulsory education, we had the very unique culture in early childhood care and education. We are not focusing on the skills and knowledge. And we also, have free play based child-centered practice in early childhood care and education. For example, my university has, as I told you, that we have 116 years history. My university kindergarten, my university laboratory kindergarten has the history of 116 years. And one of the director, the Heijo Oikawa, was the friend of John Dewey. So, we really make record of what children said and what children did. And then we make curriculum with the observation from what we saw from the children's reality. So our curriculum is not subject-based and not, preparing for early childhood care and education. So we are not preparing for elementary schools, but, we really focus on reality of the children. But though we have such a nice historical background of early childhood education, we have been facing quite hard pressure from compulsory education and commercialized things. So in my chapter, I also introduced about the pressure from the compulsory education, elementary school education, and the commercialism. I mean, especially recently, many people really want to have programming education in early childhood care and education, not nature-based or outdoor plays and those on. But so in my chapter, I also explain about that. But against this, we have more local-based, community-based. It's hard to say that. Practitioners-based governance. So, fighting against the bureaucrats, many local Japanese practitioners groups has been their own practitioner-based governance. So I have been working on that, I have introduced about many local cities in Japan that, professionals have formed and reflect the issue raised in this book. So I hope I can share recent our situation in Japan. I think my brain is not working hard as I haven't slept. It's 5 a.m. So I would like to finish my talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sachiko, and thank you for staying up. I want to remind everybody that you can use the chat to make remarks or to raise questions. And I would like now to give floor to another one who has not slept very much to be able to be in this webinar. So thank you very much, Sue, for being with us despite the very different time where you are in. Sue, you have the floor.
Thanks very much, Michael. And hello, everyone. My name's Sue Grieshaber. I work at La Trobe University in Melbourne, Australia. I'm actually in Brisbane, Australia at the moment, and there's a difference of time between those two cities. La Trobe University is a young university. It's been established only 50 years, and its mission involves social justice. And so it has that as part of its vision as well as its mission. Because Australia is was a colonised country and vestiges of colonisation remain in everyday life today, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I am. I'd also like to acknowledge elders past, present and emerging, and the contribution that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples make to our everyday lives in universities, but also our social and community lives in our environments wherever we are, not only for me in Australia, but for First Nations peoples throughout the world. So to acknowledge now the second author of our chapter, Catherine Ham. Catherine is unable to join us today, but our chapter focuses on professional development programs, and we're trying to think about complexity in professional learning for educators without reverting to technical strategies and methods. So what we did in our chapter was take a data snapshot from the professional development opportunities that are available to Australian early childhood educators. We used information from two websites from organisations that offer professional development. One is a for-profit and one is a not-for-profit organisation. So a lot of the professional development in Australia has been positioned within current neoliberal discourses of quality, and it's more technical approach rather than getting people to think or investigate. In our chapter, we were looking at how we might adopt a decolonising critical pedagogical approach as an alternative to technical strategies. And we were provoked by the slow question of what is required in professional learning to engage with complexity without reverting to technical strategies and methods. So there's lots of commonalities between the banking concept, Freire's banking concept, and what we think is happening currently in professional learning in Australian early childhood education. So what we did was use Zemblis's 2018 reinvention of Freire's critical pedagogy as a decolonising possibility. And we used that combined with some work that co-author Catherine has been doing recently. And part of our thinking with that was how a decolonial praxis is able to transform or reframe pedagogy in ways that destabilise the Eurocentric foundations of critical pedagogy. So moving to everyday pedagogical moments, what was undertaken with children in one early childhood classroom was everyday language was used from the traditional peoples of the land where the childcare centre was. So the children were learning the words, they were spending lots of time in the outdoors. The educators were working to transform their practices, which were originally and mostly still are dominated by colonial understandings of the places around. But some of the things that happened as a result of that, children started referring to the hot north wind season instead of summer, because there are not just 4 typical European seasons in this particular context. There are 6 seasons, one of which is hot north wind season. They also started using the traditional language for the names of the flora and fauna around the early childhood setting. And there are some other examples of the sorts of things that were enabled in this attempt at decolonising a critical pedagogical approach to a classroom. So what we were concerned about is how a lot of early childhood educators really don't understand their work as ideological. They think it's political neutral or apolitical. Often people don't consider the ways in which early childhood education is political. And this is one attempt for us to try and get educators to think a little bit differently, and for educators to position themselves as activists, not just how they might have thought of themselves as apolitical or neutral in terms of ideological understandings of colonialism, and ways in which those understandings of colonialism in our everyday lives with children and our work with children might be challenged. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sue. Thank you. Just a few final comments to end the presentations with. I would like to start the final comment with a quote that I take from a documentary that I saw with my son on Netflix just 2 days ago, where someone was saying that it is the critics that are the true optimists. And it said that things can only change because some people say, oh, wait a minute, this is not how we intended things to be. This is not how we thought early childhood education would be. And I think this is what many contributors in the book have done. I think, for instance, like Becky Sizwe, Sue, Sachiko, Mark, Beth, but also other examples that I brought in from Bologna. These are examples where practitioners, where grassroots organization or where scholars together with practitioners say, well, oh, wait a minute, this is not what we thought early childhood education would be. And where they construct new images. And I think that is very much for me in line with what Paulo Freire wanted to say. Paulo Freire said, pedagogy is a science of hope, and it cannot be otherwise. It is a science of hope because it's always about what we imagine a future can be, what we imagine education could look like. It is about untested feasibilities. It is about imagined futures, and therefore it is about hope. It is about changing things. And I really think we live in a historical epoch. We are, according to some, one of the next books that will come out in the series is a book of Peter Moss and Guy Roberts Holmes, and that is about neoliberalism, how neoliberalism is pervading early childhood education, but also how we maybe are living now the demise of neoliberalism. And the COVID pandemic has showed us the importance of public investments and of public ownerships of many services, among which education. So it is really a time now for what I would call repoliticization of the educational system, but of early childhood education in particular. And I couldn't phrase it better than using the words of Paulo Freire. And then I will end the presentation by reading what I wrote at the very end of the book, the last paragraph. And there I quote, Freire leaves little doubt about what education is for. Education is an understanding of the world in order to transform it. And consequently, the examples of hope, the examples of real utopias that many authors in the book have sketched, make it clear that education is necessarily a public good, not a commodification. It are examples of Bologna, of Japan, of South Africa, of so many places that show that transformation is possible and is feasible. And all these examples have something in common, although they are very different in context, etc. They have something in common, that it is from the collectivization of the personal that emerges the political and the possibility of change. It is from realizing the possibility of change that emerges the urgency of doing so. And it is in sharing stories that we become aware that alternative stories are feasible. And I skip a part and I end the book with a quote from Paulo Freire, because a crucial point that all authors in the book have in common is that they reflect their reflection on practice is that they refuse fatalism. And I end with a quote of Freire on fatalism. He says, fatalism that we see today, championed by certain economists and certain political groups, telling us that there is only one way to go, that fatalism works in favor of the process of globalization and in favor of creating a situation in which we see ourselves as powerless, transferring our power, the power of human beings, to technology. And that fatalism, therefore, has deep political implications. That fatalism today is inside the male neoliberal speech all over the world, homogenized, saying the same things in different languages, preaching a lack of importance of history, telling us that there are no social classes, no ideology, no struggle between the classes, no hope, no dreams, no utopias. And for me, that is an ideological lie. As a human being, Freire says, I protest because I continue to believe in our power of transforming reality, in our utopias cultivated over many years of civilization. And I am not even talking as a politician or as an educator, but primarily as a human being. End of the quote and end of the book. So, if there are any of you who want to make a comment or raise a question, you can, of course, also put your camera and your mic on and intervene. So I was thinking maybe Lieselot, I know you are among us. If you want to add something as a co-editor of the book series, or any other of you, please, you're welcome.
Well, hi, everyone. No, Michel, I just want to thank you all for absolutely splendid and wonderful contributions. And for you, Michel, who have brought everybody together. And somebody talked about the timeliness of this book. And I think it comes out exactly at the very right moment. I also think that it carries with it a particular combination of critique and creativity that you and I, Michel, have really discussed, that this is what we would like for the series to carry as a character. So I'm very, very impressed by all of you, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Lieselot. Any other comments?
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
And this is Dasha speaking. I'm from Sheridan College. I graduated from University of Toronto. And thanks goodness I have I've met some people who are on the board. I'm very happy to be a part of this meeting. And can start my video if you want to see me. Okay. And I've been studying Paulo Freire actually from the very broad perspective. I started like from educational perspective in general, and then when I went and narrowed it down to early childhood education. One of the things I very appreciate all your books and all your publishers, and thank you for doing such a great job. And I've attended one or two conferences of early childhood education research in Europe. Thank you guys for doing that wonderful job. And I'm very happy to see that in the meantime, in those times, you're using Paulo Freire's work. I started noticing that more in Peter Moss's publications, as well as in your book about addressing neuroscience and how it's implemented in social society. That's a very profound work that we definitely need in our present times. And just a little bit of justify of Paulo's kind of weaknesses, as well as to prompt his profound pluses prompts. I would like to say that none of the other paradigms, if we wish to call them, they address the issue of class. And Paulo was the first one who addressed the issue of class. And actually, we as early childhood educators, we clearly understand who we serve and for what purposes. And that's why this work has become very important for us. Because in the present day of COVID situation, as well as a globe situation, we do understand why this work is important. Thank you very much. Just my little pit fee. Thank you.
Thank you, Dasha. You raised a very important question also in chat. Of course, it's true that Paulo Freire has been criticized and rightly criticized for being, let's say, having a very male standpoint, and also for having a particular interpretation of Marxism. And then you raised the very interesting question of how can we democratize his work to make it, to give it a broader interpretation. I think that many of the contributors in the book have tried to do so, and to pay. And it's not a question, of course, it's not a question to just pay tribute to the work of Paulo Freire, but to reuse it and reinvent it indeed in contemporary ways.
If I can have another minute to say, I would say that in my early childhood education dissertation that I won the reward in 2019. I actually have it in here with this one. I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud. I cannot even stop saying how proud of I am, because the work of Paulo is really important and is gaining population in terms of our understanding of classical, economical, and other distribution of goods. And Paulo played a very important role, especially in his last book, Pedagogy of Hope, saying that we not just can hope, exactly, love it. And many other scholars in Northern America, including Henry Giroux and Peter McLaren, they all went different directions, but the goal is the only one, that our educational aim is to help our children in the longer run as students, and to become like profound citizens, as far as I understand. And hopefully you all support me with that. Thank you very much. Won't take you more of your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dasha. Lígia, I think you want to intervene?
Vou falar em português e peço que Maria faça a tradução. Por favor, Maria.
Okay.
Hello to all. I'm Maria. I will be helping Professor Lígia translating what she's saying. She will be speaking in Portuguese now. Pode ir,
eu gostaria de retomar, pegar esse ponto referente a essa perspectiva marxista, se seria marxismo ortodoxo no pensamento de Freire.
I would like to bring back the discussion to this point in which we can argue if Freire has an orthodox, Marxist orthodox perspective or not in his work.
Primeiro aspecto é considerar que Paulo Freire, ele, de fato, se aproximou do pensamento marxista, né, da teoria, mas também, como pessoa, ele, inclusive, era um cristão humanista. Então, que podemos pensar até determinadas contradições, mas que, no caso do Brasil, é muito recorrente, talvez boa parte da América Latina, essa relação do marxismo com um pensamento teológico, né, do cristianismo, que inclusive vai dar na teologia da libertação. Por favor.
So yes, Freire has a lot of influence of Marxist works in his work and in his theory, and he can be considered a Marxist author. But he can't be considered orthodox because he was a humanist and a Christian by faith. And in Latin America and Brazil, this intersection is very important because it leads to the construction of the theology of liberation, the thinking, the theology of liberation, that's an arm of the Catholic Church. So it's different from the Orthodox Marxists. Pode ir.
E junto a isso também, pensar a própria trajetória, né, de Freire, quando ele vai para a África, né, o trabalho que ele passa a fazer em África, como que ele entra em contato com pensadores e teóricos que, ao mesmo tempo, também dialogavam com o marxismo, mas traziam essa perspectiva anticolonialismo, né, do decolonialismo. Então, esse é um processo, o diálogo dele com Guiné-Bissau, com Hamilton Cabral, e também algumas aproximações com Frantz Fanon, que é o que até no nosso texto a gente também traz, né, uma parte que a Anete é uma pessoa que tem discutido, trabalhado bastante também, Frantz Fanon. Então, esse já é uma etapa que vai modificando o processo da compreensão dele do próprio marxismo. Mais esse pedaço, Maria, depois eu encerro.
Tá, é que isso foi longo. Vamos lá. So, and we need to remember that Paulo Freire had a lot of contact with African scholars and how their work, although also influenced by Marxism, it centers a lot on decolonial theory and the importance of the organization from the ex-colonies and in their liberation. E o que mais, mãe?
Que sim, eu citei o Amilcar Cabral e o Frantz Fanon, né, que aí também vai trazer a questão do racismo. Quer dizer, tem uma questão étnica, mas também a questão racial, né? E eu acho que só para encerrar, eu já encerro para não prolongar. O Freire foi uma pessoa que viveu um longo tempo, né? Só falece na década de 90. Pedagogia do Oprimido está fazendo 50 anos. De lá para cá, ele publicou muitos trabalhos e dialogando com muitos pensadores. Então, a própria crítica do feminismo, ele tenta... Ele não que ele se modifique, mas ele reconhece que ele é um homem, né, marcado por uma cultura machista, por uma cultura racializada e com esses aspectos do colonialismo. Então, eu entendo que tem uma problematização da ortodoxia, do marxismo ortodoxo.
I think it becomes very difficult for the translation if you,
Yes, okay. So, and we need to remember that also he had contact with authors like Frantz Fanon and Amilcar Cabral, and the centrality of the discussions of race and racism in the work. And just to close her what she was saying, she wanted to remind us that Paulo Freire lived for a long time. Pedagogia do Oprimido, the Pedagogy of the Oppressed, is it's the 50th anniversary, but he only died in the 90s. Yes. So he revisited a lot of his work during his lifetime and tried to acknowledge that he was a man, he was shaped and lived by a Brazilian society which is very racist and very sexist, and that influenced his work. And he tried to be self-critical and self-conscious and change it as he went to life, but he incorporated it later. So I think it's that what you said.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. I'm very sorry. Sorry, Michael. I just want to say.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know what happens, Dasha. We cannot hear you anymore. But I would like.
I'm out.
We're mute. Yeah. You were muted.
I'm muted. Thank you, Michael.
Have it brief so that we can come to a conclusion. Are you finished, or we missed part of what you said? You were muted, but okay.
Oh yeah, I just didn't. I didn't want to interfere so abruptly, and I just wanted to say that I have done a number of research about Paulo Freire. I really appreciate his point of view. I'm just saying that throughout the years in American content, there was a certain type of critique towards Paulo Freire's pedagogy, which is not kind of a surprise. And with that, we can actually turn our views to Edgar Morin's Complexity in Education, which is quite well connected into my understanding. And thank you very much for giving me a say, and sorry for taking so much time. Sorry about that. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for this, and also thank you, Lydia, for resituating. And of course, I think it's important we have taken, let's say, Pedagogy of the Oppressed as a starting point because also of this 50th anniversary. But it's good to keep in mind that that was not the only work that Paulo Freire leaves to us. That's only part of his legacy, and there's much later work where he comes back to some of the critiques, amongst others, the critiques of feminism, but also the critiques of being blind for racism, etc. So it's indeed much more complex. And what it points to for me is, and that brings us back to the very introduction of this evening, is the concept of appropriation. So the work is there and the legacy is there for us to take hold and to work with and to appropriate the work and to help us reflect. And it's not a matter of doing Paulo Freire. That is not what is at stake here. Is that it is one of these sources of inspiration that can help us to challenge what is presented to us as familiar, and therefore to take our responsibility as human beings, as political actors, and as early childhood workers. And I repeat what I said just a few minutes ago, to work on this education in the spirit of what is education for. It is about understanding the world in order to transform it. So I would like very much all the contributors, the calligraphs, and especially also all the authors who have taken their time to contribute to this book and to be here, some in a dreadful hour of the day or of the night. So thank you all. Thank you also all the others to participate in this, and you have seen it in the chat box. We come from everywhere. I've seen that people are here from Palestine, from Uganda, from many different places, from Stubal, from many different places. So thank you for joining us, and let's continue the good work.